Now, I was completely enthralled by Roy Gamblin's description of his engine failure in the Gnat and his subsequent forced landing through cloud on an unfamiliar airfield, and I kind of rode every minute of that with him, mulling over the difficult decisions he had to make. For me, the book was worth reading just for that chapter. Now, you've had a long career, Rick. Anything similar in your history that comes to mind?
No, I've never. I mean, well, you read the book. There are plenty of stories of forced landings in there. Whether it was my very good friend Bobby Eccles, who was instructor to Valley, went to the Red Arrows, or Roy Somerville had 2 forced landings from while he was a Red Arrow, and then there's Roy Gamblin. And as you say, it's a fascinating story with Mike Hullier in the back. I never had. I mean, we used to train, as you will remember. We trained for forced landings, visual forced landings, and radar forced landings as well. But at Lambetter, and we used to do radar forced landings at Lambetter. But I think on this occasion, it was after hours basically. The airfield wasn't open. They did a fantastic job getting it on the ground. Absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely.
Roy, in fact, he to this day he lives not far from Lambetter.
Oh wow!
He's in sight of Lambetter, looks out and remembers it well all the time.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Now, many of the anecdotes in your book seem to deal with numerous infractions and bent rules perpetrated by ex-fighter pilots at places like Little Rissington and Kemble. Surely there were a few responsible QFIs on the Gnat?
Yes, I was one.
Of course you were.
So, I used to like to think that we were professional and responsible, and I think we were in general. But we were fighter pilots, and that was, in many ways, we would. The first time these young students coming off the Jet Provost, and they used to love being at Valley, loved being sort of with chaps like myself and yourself later on, who'd come back from the front line, who were fighter pilots themselves by then. In my day, whether it was mainly Hunters and Lightnings, in your day it was Harriers and Phantoms and things like that. So there was always spirit there, and you can read it right from the start. I mean, at one stage, for example, they were concerned about the Gnat's ability to fly in formation. And
it was banned, wasn't it?
You read in the book there, a well-known aviator called Al Pollock,
yes.
of flying through sort of Tower Bridge fame.
Yes, exactly.
Who was an instructor at Valley, and it was he and a few others who did some illegal formation, which actually led to the formation of the Yellowjacks, the forerunners of the Red Arrows, but also sort of led to sort of getting the aircraft properly cleared for formation, because it was a beautiful aircraft to fly in formation, absolutely lovely.
It was, and despite the sensitivity of the controls, once you got the hang of it, it was really not a hard airplane.
Nope.
The engine response was very precise,
Yep.
as I recall. Brilliant.
It sat there beautifully. No, used to love the formation there.
So how would you compare it with, say, flying in formation in the Phantom?
Well, the Phantom, apart from being a war machine, is an interesting aircraft in its own right, with all the different. The engines operate rather differently, and you're in an aircraft that's got sort of puff and blow sort of things all over the place. I mean, the Phantom, don't get me wrong, the Phantom is very nice in formation, very stable, and nice if you've got yourself settled. But it's a big aircraft, 20 tons, versus the Gnat, which is less than 1 ton, I think. They're different. I think, like any aircraft I've flown, I've enjoyed flying formation in all the aircraft I've flown. I have found them different, and it's very often dependent on the size of the aircraft. And I mean, for example, in the Gnat, those having the rate of roll being as it was, so the one thing about the Gnat, you could over control in pitch and roll. That's when you go into formation initially. That was probably a little bit of a problem, which quickly like everything else, it just settles down, and then you're rock steady. And the same with the Phantom, you get used to that puff and blow and what have you, but it gets rock steady eventually.
Yeah, you really had to fly the Gnat with your fingertips.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Phantom had that appalling engine lag that used to catch us all out every now and again. Now, the meat of your book is formed from personal recollections from those who flew it or were associated with it. How did you manage to bring them all together?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I published my first book 2 years ago, which was my autobiography called Rate of Climb, which has sold very well. And I was having lunch with my publisher from Grub Street, and he said to me, he said, "Rick, I want you to write another book." So at lunch we got talking about what the book should be about. And that's how we came to, I said, a book that hasn't been properly sort of covered is the Gnat. Because I knew that people loved flying the Gnat. I knew there were lots of stories associated with the Gnat. And so that's how it happened. But we signed a contract in October 2021. I had to deliver a manuscript in March, middle of March 2022. So it was a very short order. And I thought, at that stage, I thought, I think I'll get my mate Tom Eales to come and join me. So he came and we did it together, and it was the best thing that I could have done because we really worked exceedingly well together. We then worked out, the first thing we had to do was go out, we had our own stories obviously, to go out and let people know we were writing a book and get information back. Well, I'm not joking, we were absolutely amazed. We went out, we've got a lot of contacts ourselves, but for example, I mean the Red Arrows sent it round to the world to get it out to their people. We got in touch with India, and once we got in touch with India and Finland, then the word went around there quickly. And we were absolutely inundated with people sort of contributing. In fact, I don't mind saying that we've got so much material that we've got enough material right now to write a Gnat Boys 2.
Oh wow, excellent.
You'll find in the book there's I think there's 6 stories from India. We've got at least another 6 or 7 stories waiting for Gnat Boys 2, which all depends on sort of how the sales go. So I really want the sales to go well so that my publisher will get us to write the next one.
Oh yeah, I think I'd love to read it.
So,
as well.
but so we were amazed at contributions, and they all came in very quickly, and we did most of the work from January, February into beginning of March, and we submitted the draft on time, and it was published on time in July this year. So we were well pleased with that, and the other thing that we introduced, which is in the book, is there were so many people who loved flying the aircraft, so many people contributed stories that we decided, well, got people who contributed only a couple of lines to a couple of paragraphs to a couple of pages. And then we've got others who contributed enough for chapters, as you've seen. So we thought, well, that's why we've got a section in there for what we call snippets and short stories. And that, I think, personally, I like, because that gives visibility to many more of those who flew the Gnat and just their little sort of cameos that they've contributed.
Absolutely. Now, many of those stories told to us by the Gnat Boys mention being worryingly short of fuel. I know we've kind of mentioned it, but particularly after diversions and the like. But that doesn't seem to have been your experience.
Well, we were short of fuel, but I suppose, having flown the Lightning, you just fuel becomes such an important part of flying the aircraft, and it was in the Gnat too, don't get me wrong, it was. And I mean, at Valley, we did have, where we instructed on the aircraft, we were very fortunate to have Mona only just down the way. So if we had a problem at Valley, for example, where we had 3 runways anyway, all right, some of them, the wind was always blowing at Valley, so probability is you've only had one that you could actually use. But normally we could always pop it down to Mona. So and we did have people with shorter fuel who had to go into Mona instead. So yes, no, I'm not being. Fuel did require management in the Gnat. You had to you had to know sort of how much fuel you needed to recover down the dive arc, as we called it, how much fuel you needed for the whether it was run and brake or feed into a GCA, ground controlled approach, whatever. So there was plenty of planning to do, and you had to know how much fuel you're using for an individual circuit. So yeah, but I don't think we had too many people with sort of getting ultra short of fuel.
Now, you had to be quite grown up about it. It was one aspect of the Gnat that kept you very disciplined, wasn't it?
Yes.
Whereas in the Hawk, I recall, you know, it was you were never really worried about it.
No, I mean the Hawk's different. I mean, the Hawk is, compared with the Gnat, the Hawk is viceless.
Absolutely, yes. And yes, good job. The frontline airplanes are pretty viceless nowadays. So more on that subject, I was interested to read one of the Finnish Air Force pilots' comments on the Gnat F1 when he was describing flying dissimilar air combat against the Draken. The Draken, you seem to use its fuel so fast that the Gnat would stay airborne. It would have one fight with the Draken, then they would go away, and another formation would come up and then stay airborne for another fight. So perhaps the F1 had a bit more fuel, or just perhaps the Draken was very thirsty.
I think the Draken was very thirsty.
Okay.
rather like the Lightning, quite frankly. I mean, you know.
Yeah.
And I did do some, interesting enough, and it's in the book, I led a detachment to RAF Coningsby, in fact, of Gnats, to do dissimilar air combat with the Phantoms there. Which was, I mean, the Phantom had plenty of fuel in it anyway, but that was an interesting experience.
I know, being able to fight an aircraft that could almost disappear if you pointed at someone must have been wonderful. Brilliant. So in your book, it contains some great stories, like the Indian squadron commander who told his pilots to check their guns after takeoff by firing a few Aden cannon shells into a nearby river without realizing it was used by hundreds of local people for their daily ablutions. Do you have a particular favorite story in the book?
No, I don't think I do. I just have. It's rather like I just like everything that's in the book, basically. I don't think I do have I get asked this sort of question quite a lot. I get asked the question particularly about myself, and which is my greatest memory. The trouble is I've got so many memories. It's difficult. I find it difficult to have a favourite story. I do.
Excellent. So The Gnat Boys isn't the only amazing aviation book you've authored, because you mentioned you've penned a biography called The Rate of Climb. Could you tell us a bit about that and what we would expect if we sat down and read it?
It's very different from Gnat Boys for a start. Gnat purely about the Gnat, whereas Rate of Climb is my autobiography. It covers my life. So, and it's gone down very well. But, you know, it's not just a book about my flying career. It also covers my life growing up and in both South Africa and the UK, and what I've done since I left the Air Force. So it's my whole life. So it's very different. I am intending my third book, which I'm thinking about now and beginning to research, is going to be, I hope, about my father and I, and that will be a pure flying book, sort of relating what he did in his days in World War II, flying the Hurricane, in all sorts of situations, with my days flying the Lightning, Phantom, Gnat, Tornado, etc. But that's in my mind at the moment. That's my task for the winter of 23-24.
Excellent, and I look forward to what you produce. Now, is there anything else that you'd like us to talk about before we wind this up, Frank?
I'm so pleased that Gnat Boys has been published. I'm very pleased at some of the reviews. It's early days. Some of the reviews we're receiving, and people are clearly enjoying the stories that are in the book. And Tom and I, we were very, very satisfied with what we produced and what's in the book, because there's something there for everyone, and it's a real, and it's filled a niche in the market that was needed. No, I just, you know, I set out in life. I didn't intend to write any books, quite frankly, and it's a big story behind writing my autobiography, my first book. But having done that, I learnt a lot, and that led on to the production of my second book, which is a bit different from. I mean, I didn't write this all myself. We produced it, and but it was a very satisfying effort. Yeah, I've like everything in life, I've learnt a lot, and I think writing books seems to be something a growing interest in my life.
Well, congratulations. I enjoyed it enormously, and thank you very much indeed for giving us your time. It's been a pleasure seeing you again, and good luck with the Gnat boys.
And Nick, if I might say so, it's great to see you again. Sort of, you bring back memories to me of days at Valley, and you mentioned, you know, your navigation prowess at Valley. And one of the things I was proud of at Valley, if I can just say, was the fact that I came off Lightnings basically, and I was an air defence pilot, so I didn't do sort of that much sort of low flying then. But at Valley we did a lot of low flying, and I used to love it. And I did the pilot navigation instructor course, mainly reserved for those who come off the low-level mud-moving world. So I broke into their territory. And that was really one of the most satisfying things that I did there. And that's how we first came into contact. Yeah. Then, of course, at Lucas, different squadrons, mainly in the bar, I think it was there, wasn't it?
Yes, and I'm very glad that you did that course, Rick, because without it, I think my flying career would have ground to a halt at Valley. But I really appreciate it, and thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you, Nick.
The Gnat Boys isn't just a historic record of one of the many fast jet trainers used by the RAF, because most of them have come and gone without leaving an indelible mark on the memories of those who flew it like the Gnat did. It earned many nicknames like the Pocket Rocket, the Paraffin Dart and the Sabre Slayer, to name just a few. Its sleek, needle-like appearance and remarkable manoeuvrability weren't the only things to imprint it on an entire generation of aviation lovers. It was the glorious sight of 9 bright red Gnats of the RAF's formation team flying twinkle rolls in close formation that ensured it became an enduring memory. This book encapsulates all of that, but then reveals the wonderful memories of many pilots who flew in it, in particular armed with only a pair of Aden cannons, taking the Gnat into combat to bring down enemy aircraft. This book is more about just one tiny aircraft. It's about a shared love of flying that has touched pilots across the world, and I truly commend it to you.